You can always tell when someone's lying, but you don't always know why. That's what I kept thinking that Monday morning when I opened the front door and found a yellow paper taped to the side of my mailbox. It was wrinkled and damp from the dew, but the red stamp across the top was dry and clear. Notice to vacate. At first I just stared at it. I thought maybe someone had made a mistake. Maybe it was meant for someone else. But there it was, my name, spelled right, typed neatly. And the address? Mine down to the apartment number. It didn't make sense. I hadn't missed rent. I paid early even. I didn't owe anyone. I hadn't been loud or reckless. I'd lived in that little one-bedroom for almost 9 years. Everyone knew me, the landlord, the neighbors, the postman. I kept to myself, fixed my own leaks, even watered the building's sad excuse for landscaping, so why now? I brought the notice inside, sat on my worn-out couch, and read it 3 times. It said I had 7 days. 7 days to clear out or face. Formal removal. No reason was listed. Just a typed paragraph quoting some housing code that sounded made up and ended with, "Failure to comply will result in immediate legal action." I read it again, then again. It didn't make sense. I called the landlord. Straight to voicemail. I walked to the office, which was locked even though the lights were on. I knocked and knocked until a kid, no older than 19, opened the door and said, "We're not supposed to talk to you. You've got the notice, that's all." And then he closed the door. Just like that, thought something was wrong. I knew it in my bones. Not just wrong, planned. I wasn't crazy. I had never had a single complaint in 9 years. I pulled out my rent receipts, lined them up across my table. 12 months, paid early, every month before that too. Never late. Never skipped. But now, suddenly, I had a week to leave. I thought about calling my sister right then. But I didn't, not yet. Not because I didn't trust her, because I knew what she would do, and I wasn't ready for that yet. You see, my sister isn't just family. She's the county judge. The youngest judge our county's ever had. And not just young, smart, sharp, and stubborn as they come. But I didn't want to pull that card unless I had no other choice. I needed to know what they were doing and why. So I waited until late evening and walked around the building. I knew every corner of that place. I found an open window near the back of the office and climbed through like I did when I lost my keys once years ago. Inside, it smelled like stale coffee and printer ink. I went straight for the desk where the notices were printed. It wasn't locked. That was their first mistake. I flipped through the files until I found mine, and what I saw made my stomach twist. There was a report, fake as daylight, stating I had been reported 3 times for disturbing the peace, once for harboring an unauthorized pet, and once for aggressive verbal threats toward staff, all lies, every word of it. I'd never had a dog, never had guests, and hadn't spoken to the management in months. But here it was typed, signed, and filed. And that's when I saw the signature at the bottom, a name I didn't know. Someone new. Someone who had never even spoken to me. I took pictures, every page, every forged complaint, and I left the same way I came in. The next day I filed a report with the tenant board. I sent emails. I even tried the local housing office. But you know how that goes, weeks of waiting, forms and no real answers. Meanwhile, the countdown had already started. I had 5 days left. Neighbors started acting strange. Some stopped saying hello. A few avoided eye contact. I found out later they had been told I was a danger, mentally unstable, unpredictable, just more lies. I knocked on Mr. Finch's door across the hall. He had been my neighbor for years. Shared soup during the winter, even helped fix my sink once. But now he barely opened the door. "I don't want any trouble," he said, and closed it again. Trouble. That word echoed in my ears. Someone was trying to make me look like a problem. But why? I didn't own the place. I wasn't in the way. I didn't know any secrets. At least I thought I didn't. Then I remembered something about 2 weeks earlier. I'd seen a man with a clipboard walking the hallway, taking photos. He said he was with a real estate group doing market evaluations. I didn't think much of it, but now it started to click. Someone wanted the building emptied, Fast. Maybe it had sold. Maybe they planned to tear it down or flip it into high-priced condos. Whatever it was, I was in the way. I still hadn't called my sister. I don't know what I was waiting for. Maybe I wanted to win on my own. Maybe I didn't want her to see how bad things had gotten. But when I got home and saw a second notice taped to my door, this time with a court date, I knew I had no choice. I called her that night. She picked up on the second ring, same as always. "Hey, stranger," she said. Her voice alone made me feel better. "I need to talk," I told her. "It's urgent." We met the next morning at a small diner. She wore her work blazer, even off duty. Her eyes scanned the room the moment she entered, always sharp, always alert. I handed her the notice, the photos, the fake complaints, all of it. She read everything in silence. When she looked up, her jaw was set tight. "They're finished," she said quietly. I hadn't even asked for her help yet. But she was all ready. And she couldn't preside over my case, conflict of interest, but she didn't need to. She knew exactly who could. And she knew how to pull the strings to make sure it was seen by someone honest. She also knew the manager who had signed the fake reports. His name was Darren Webb, new to the company, known for pushing people out with false claims. He had a record, not criminal, but complaints, dozens of them. My sister knew every judge who had ever received those complaints. They'd all gone quiet. But not anymore. In less than 24 hours, she had the case. Reassigned to Judge Ramos, fair, by the book, and unimpressed by corporate intimidation. My court date was still set, but the outcome was already shifting. My sister wasn't loud about it. She didn't threaten anyone. She didn't even speak to the landlord. She just made sure everything that needed to be seen was on the right desk at the right time. Still, I had to show up. I had to stand there and defend myself against the stack of lies written in ink. I was nervous. My hands shook when I stepped into the courtroom, but as I looked around, I noticed something strange. The landlord wasn't there. The property manager wasn't there. Only a legal assistant with a file and a clipboard looking completely out of place. When the case was called, Judge Ramos looked bored. He flipped through the file, reading it slowly. Then he looked up. "Where's the complainant?" he asked. The assistant stuttered. They're unavailable, Your Honor." "I see," the judge said. "Well, I have affidavits here. From the defendant, photographic evidence and records from the past 9 years showing no violations of any kind." He paused. "And I have a notarized letter from the building's previous manager stating the defendant was an ideal tenant. My sister had found him too, tracked him down. He'd retired, moved 2 states over, but she got the letter." The judge leaned back in his chair. "This case is dismissed. The eviction is void. And I'm ordering an investigation into the management. Company effective immediately." I didn't say a word. I just stood there, not sure if I was dreaming. But the moment I stepped out into the hallway, I saw her waiting, my sister. Arms crossed, not smiling, just nodding. Like she knew all along how this would end. We went back to the diner. Ordered coffee and pie, said nothing for a while. Then she finally looked at me and said, "Next time you call me sooner." I laughed. "Yes, Your Honor, but it wasn't over yet, not really." What I didn't know then was that this case would uncover more, not just my own story, but dozens of others. And what came next would shake the entire county housing board. The day after the hearing, everything looked the same from the outside. The hallway lights still flickered, the elevator still squeaked, and the smell of burnt toast from someone's breakfast drifted under my door. But something had changed. People started talking to me again, softly at first. A neighbor offered me a bag of oranges. One nodded at me in the stairwell and said, "Sorry." I knew what they meant. They believed the lies. I didn't blame them. That's how these things work. You plant doubt, and it spreads. But now the truth was sprouting up in its place. My sister called that evening. She sounded calm, but I could tell by the clipped tone in her voice that her mind was racing. "There's something bigger going on here," she said. "Your file wasn't the only one." I asked what she meant. She explained that, after digging into the building's management, she found eviction notices sent to at least 7 other tenants in the last 6 months, most of them elderly. Single or long-term renters with below-market leases. Perfect. Targets. Their cleaning house, she said, illegally. The landlord had hired a management company that specialized in quiet evictions, making life so difficult or scary that people leave on their own before fighting back. In most cases, it worked, but not with me. And not with her watching. She had already opened a formal judicial inquiry, but she warned me it wouldn't be easy. These companies had lawyers, money, and experience burying things, but they weren't. Ready for someone like her? Or me. The next few days moved fast. Word spread about the court decision. A local housing nonprofit reached out asking for a statement. I declined. For now, I wasn't looking for attention. I just wanted to feel safe in my home again, but something gnawed at me. If I stayed quiet, would they just try it with someone else? Then one morning, a knock came at my door. A woman stood there, maybe in her 60s, holding a cane. She looked nervous. I heard what happened with you, she said. Her name was Mrs. Klein. She lived on the second floor. I had seen her around, always quiet, always alone. She told me she'd gotten a similar notice, but hers wasn't even delivered properly. Just slipped under her door with no explanation. They said I had too many overnight visitors, she said, her voice trembling. But I live alone. I haven't had company in years. She looked tired, worried, and I knew right then I couldn't just walk away from this. I had to help her. And anyone else they were trying to silence, I called my sister. She was already 3 steps ahead. Tell her to document everything, every word, every paper. I'll loop in the housing rights coordinator. Within days, my apartment became something like a mini war room. Mrs. Klein wasn't the only one. By the end of the week, we'd found 12 people in the building who had received false or vague notices. Some had already moved out. Others were packing, too scared to fight. They didn't know their rights. No one had ever told them they had any. My sister brought in legal interns from her office, off the record, to help organize complaints, gather statements, build a paper trail. This wasn't just about saving one home anymore. This was about stopping a system that thrived in silence. Then, one evening, a strange envelope showed up taped to my door. No stamp. No name. Just a thick packet inside, copies of internal emails, expense reports, and a typed list labeled Targeted Units, Vacate by End of Quarter. My apartment number was highlighted. So was Mrs. Klein's. So were half the others. At the bottom of the list, a projected sale value after eviction. Someone had leaked it. But who? The documents showed clear coordination between the property owner and the management firm. They weren't just trying to increase rent. They were setting up a bulk sale to a private development company, but only if the building was cleared. First, it was fraud, hidden beneath real estate jargon and red tape. My sister took one look at the files and said, "They're done." She submitted them to the county ethics committee. She filed a judicial ethics referral. And she arranged a private meeting with a local reporter who had been trying to expose tenant scams like this for years. Within days, the story was brewing. Within a week, it was on the front page. The headline read, "Tenants Tricked into Eviction. For Real Estate Scheme, County Judge's Sister Among Victims." I had asked them not to include me, but my sister insisted. "This is how you stop them," she said. "You shine the light." That's when things really started to shift. More tenants came forward. Not just from our building, but from others. Managed by the same company, they brought similar stories. Fake complaints, suddenly broken appliances, unexplained fees, fear, isolation, then eviction. My sister coordinated with a coalition of attorneys, nonprofits, and activists. A class action suit was forming, and while she couldn't represent them herself, she made sure the right people had the right support. But with all this rising momentum, the pressure got heavier. One night I came home and found my door slightly open, nothing stolen, just moved. A book knocked off the shelf. The window cracked an inch. It wasn't a robbery. It was a message, I told my sister. She was furious. "This is intimidation," she said. "Classic tactic. They're trying to scare you off." She wanted to install a camera, send someone to watch the building, but I said no, I wasn't running. "Not now," but it kept happening. A flat tire. Phone calls with no one on the other end. A man following me from the grocery store. I wasn't scared for myself. Not really. But I knew they were desperate. They weren't just protecting profit, they were hiding something worse. Then we got the call, a whistleblower. From inside the real estate firm, she wouldn't give her name. But she told us what we feared. The eviction plan wasn't just shady business. It was fraud, backed by forged documents, fake tenant complaints, and illegal bonuses given to employees for every low-income tenant removed from their homes. We asked for proof. She sent it. Screenshots, payouts, even scripts used by property managers to justify evictions in court. It was a machine, one built to displace, replace, and profit. And now it was exposed. My sister brought the evidence straight to the district attorney. Charges were discussed. A formal investigation was launched. The developer pulled out of the sale. The management company's license was flagged. And the property owner? He vanished overnight. Packed up and left the state, but we weren't done yet. The tenants still needed justice. Many had been displaced. Others still lived in fear. My sister led a petition to freeze all evictions under that company's name countywide. The judge approved it. Investigations spread to other cities. The story went national. Suddenly, I wasn't just the person who almost lost their home. I was the person who helped dozens keep theirs. Mrs. Klein hugged me one morning, tears in her eyes. "You saved my life," she whispered. I shook my head. "No, you spoke up. That's how it starts." And still I thought about that envelope. The leak. Someone inside the system had helped us. We never found out who. Maybe they were fired. Maybe they're still watching. But I owe them more than I can say. My sister still calls every night. Not as a judge, just as my sister. We talk about the weather, about the pie at the diner, about the strange way life brings you back around. Sometimes she asks if I regret it, not calling her sooner, and I tell her the truth. If I had, maybe we would have stopped them faster. But maybe we needed the story to unfold this way, for everyone to see. And she always says the same thing. You did good, you stood tall. We didn't just stop an eviction. We cracked something. Wide open, a pattern that had been running unchecked for years. And in the end, they picked the wrong person to lie to. The courthouse steps had never been that full. News cameras lined the sidewalk, reporters whispered into microphones. People held signs, some angry, some hopeful. It didn't feel like my life anymore, it felt like a headline. But it was still my story, still my home. And now it had become a story bigger than me, bigger than the building, even bigger than the county. It was about how easy it had become for powerful people to lie, and how hard it was for ordinary people to stand back up. The class action lawsuit had grown faster than anyone expected. My sister helped from the shadows, connecting honest lawyers to scared tenants. By the time we filed, we had 67 plaintiffs from 6 different properties, and it kept growing. Every day, another call, another story. A veteran who was pushed out for having a therapy pet. A single mom accused of imaginary noise complaints. An elderly couple forced to move after being told their lease expired, even though it was legally protected. What started with a forged report about me now had turned into a wildfire of truth. We didn't want a payout. We wanted accountability. We wanted policies rewritten, licenses revoked. We wanted every name tied to this corruption made public. But it wasn't that easy. The real estate firm had money. They hired sharp attorneys who spoke calmly and smiled. While twisting facts into confusion, they claimed we misunderstood that the evictions were legal, that the tenants voluntarily left. They had documents, plenty of them. But we had proof those documents were fabricated. The first court session wasn't explosive. It was quiet, cold, legal words flying back and forth. But the tension was there, the pressure. The knowledge that one wrong word, one false statement, could shift the scales. Then came the testimony. One by one, tenants stood and spoke. Not just about paperwork or housing codes, but about how it felt to be told your home wasn't yours anymore. To be made to feel like a problem when all you ever did was survive, they cried. They shook. Some could barely speak. But they told the truth. Mrs. Klein stood, her cane shaking in her hand, and said, "They lied about me because I was easy to erase, but I'm still here." That line stayed in the air for a long time. The judge listened. Not just with her ears, but with her eyes. And I knew in that moment something was shifting, but the other side didn't flinch. They brought in experts, economists, contractors. They made it sound like business. Just numbers. They said rents had to rise. Buildings had to evolve. That it was unfortunate, but not illegal. And that's when the whistleblower came forward. We didn't know her name before. She had stayed quiet, hidden. But now, with the storm rising, she chose to step out. Her name was Nadine, mid-30s, worked in accounting for the firm. She had been the one who sent the envelope. Her voice was soft in the courtroom, but every word hit like thunder. She described how bonuses were issued for cleared units, how complaints were created from templates, how management was trained to strategically relocate undesirables. That was the term they used. She showed emails, memos, even internal slide decks that referred to the plan as flush and flip. The room went still. The defense scrambled. They tried to discredit her, called her disgruntled, but she had backup. She brought her HR reviews, screenshots, audio recordings. There was no denying it now. Outside, the media swarmed. Headlines exploded. Politicians began weighing in, and pressure mounted on county leaders who had been silent for years. Meanwhile, back in the building, the mood changed. People started smiling again. The hallway bulletin board filled with thank you notes. Someone even fixed the broken light near the laundry room. We had a little celebration in the courtyard, just cookies and coffee. Nothing big, but it felt like a victory, not the kind with confetti. The kind with relief. But the firm didn't give up. They countersued. Claimed defamation. Claimed emotional damage. Said we were ruining lives and careers with baseless accusations. My sister was calm. That's how they buy time, she said. They stretch it, delay it, hoping people get tired and give up. But we didn't give up. The legal team pressed harder, filed injunctions, demanded full audits of all properties managed by the firm, found patterns, found links to other counties. It wasn't just here, it was statewide. A quiet strategy used by dozens of companies. Evict, flip, profit. Suddenly, the state attorney general got involved. A task force was launched. Licenses suspended. One executive was arrested for obstruction. Nadine was given whistleblower protections. And we, us ordinary tenants, were invited to speak at a housing reform summit in the Capitol. I didn't want to go. I wasn't a speaker. I wasn't polished. But my sister looked at me and said, "You're the reason all this started. Your voice matters." So I went. I stood in front of a microphone in a tall, polished room filled with suits and cameras and blinking red lights. My hands trembled, but I told my story, not with fancy words. Just the truth. I told them how it felt to have your door labeled, how people stopped looking you in the eye, how lies travel faster than any defense. I told them about Mrs. Klein, about the first notice, about the silence that follows shame, and I ended with this: they lied. But I stood because someone in my life didn't let me fall. Everyone needs someone like that. And if the system can't give it, then we have to be it for each other. There was silence. Then applause, not loud, not dramatic, but steady. The reforms didn't come overnight, but they came. Tenant protections were expanded. Management firms had to register under stricter rules. Eviction notices required independent review. And across the state, people were learning that they had rights. Nadine got a new job. The firm that tried to bury her lost everything. My building was sold, yes, but this time to a nonprofit that promised to preserve the rent structure and renovate with dignity. And my sister? She was nominated to the appellate court. Higher bench, more power. But same heart. She still calls every night, still checks on me, still says the same line before hanging up: "Proud of you." Sometimes I think back to that first morning when I found the paper taped to my box. I wonder what would have happened if I just walked away. If I just left, quietly, like they wanted, but idea in single quotes, because sometimes The only way to stop a lie is to stand in its way and refuse to move. You don't always see the moment everything changes. Sometimes it's slow, quiet, like the way sunlight creeps across a floor in the morning, barely noticeable until suddenly the whole room is lit. It had been almost a year since the first eviction notice landed on my door like a trap set for someone who didn't know the rules. Back then I didn't know what I was fighting. I just knew something didn't feel right. I had no idea it would lead to investigations, lawsuits, arrests, and headlines. I didn't think people would rally around one tenant's fight for fairness. But they did. And when the final hearing came, it wasn't about me anymore. It was about every person who had been pushed out of their home with no one to turn to. The courtroom was packed. Not with cameras this time, but with neighbors, lawyers, advocates, reporters, even some former employees from the management company who now stood with us. The judge walked in with calm authority. She'd read every file, every claim, every complaint. This wasn't just a decision, it was a reckoning. The lead attorney for our side stood and spoke first. Her voice was steady but firm. She listed the tactics used to force tenants out: fabricated violations, unauthorized notices, falsified documentation, illegal incentives for property managers. Every sentence was backed by proof. She didn't use dramatic language. She didn't need to. The facts spoke loud enough. Then the defense stood. They tried to pivot, claimed miscommunication, claimed rogue employees. They pointed fingers in every direction but their own. Said it was unfortunate but not intentional, that they'd fix it. That they were cooperating, but it was too late. The judge saw through it. She called out the systemic failures, the negligence, the greed. And finally, she gave her ruling. The firm was to pay full damages to all plaintiffs, including relocation funds for those already displaced. Licenses of key managers would be permanently revoked. The company would be banned from operating in the state for 5 years. And most importantly, new housing oversight laws were to be immediately enacted as a result of the case. People clapped. Some cried. I just sat still, staring at the floor, letting the moment wash over me. Afterward, the hallway was filled with quiet hugs and whispered thank yous. Mrs. Klein held my hand for a long time. We won, she said softly. I nodded, but inside I knew it wasn't really about winning. It was about surviving, about holding your ground long enough for the truth to rise. Nadine, the whistleblower, stood off to the side. She looked relieved but tired. We hadn't spoken much face to face. She came up to me now and said, I used to sit behind a desk and ignore what I saw. I told myself it wasn't my job to fix it. Then you fought back and I couldn't unsee it anymore. I thanked her. She deserved more than words, but I didn't know what else to offer. She gave up her job, her safety, maybe even her future in that industry to do what was right. And that's something very few people ever do. The next few weeks felt like the calm after a storm. People started moving back into the building, some who had left under pressure. The nonprofit that took over held a community meeting on the rooftop garden. We talked about repairs, about safety, about building trust again. They even asked me to serve on the Tenant advisory board. I said yes. The newspaper ran a final headline: Tenant victory sparks statewide housing reform. It was surreal seeing my name in print beneath words like justice and landmark case. But I knew none of it would have happened without my sister. She stayed behind the scenes for most of it. Not because she was afraid, but because she knew the power of influence doesn't always come from a podium. Sometimes it comes from making sure the right people are sitting in the room when it matters most. One evening, as the sky turned orange and purple beyond my window, we sat together on my balcony. She had brought dinner soup in a thermos, just like we used to eat as kids. We didn't talk much at first, just watched the city wind down. Then she looked over at me and asked, "Do you feel safe now?" I thought about it, about how close I came to losing everything, about the nights I barely slept, about the silence from neighbors and the noise of fear. Then I looked around at the lights turning on in the windows nearby, at the children playing on the sidewalk, at Mrs. Klein sitting on her bench below, and I said, "Yes, I do now." She smiled. Then it was worth every late night, every call, every argument I had to push through. I laughed. Even the time you made the county attorney break his pen in frustration? Especially that, she said with a grin. We toasted. With our soup cups and sat in silence again. No grand speeches, no dramatic finish. Just peace. But the story didn't end there. A year later, I spoke at a conference on housing rights. I stood before a crowd of people who had their own battles, their own scars. I told them about what happened to me, about how lies can break a person, but truth, when spoken loud enough, can break the system that allowed the lie to live. I told them to find their voice, and to never be afraid to use it, even if it shakes. After my speech, someone from the crowd approached me. She was young, maybe early 20s, clutching a folder with lease documents. Her landlord had just served her a notice that didn't make sense. She looked terrified. She said, "I don't know what to do." I told her, "You start by not leaving. That's the first step. Then you find someone who will fight with you." She nodded. We sat down right there on the floor and read her papers together. It was her first battle. But she wouldn't face it alone, and that's what mattered. Not that I won my case. Not that my sister was a judge. Not that we made the news. What mattered was that someone else would now get to stay in their home too, that the ripple kept moving forward, that the lies didn't win. I still live in that same apartment, the same walls, the same creaky pipes. But everything feels different now, lighter, brighter, like the place remembers everything that happened, and it's proud of us for not giving up. Sometimes I pass the mailboxes where it all started and run my fingers along the cool metal. And I remember how it felt to pull that notice off the box. The confusion, the fear, the anger, all of it. But now, when I close my door behind me each night, I do it with a quiet sense of power. Because I know that even the smallest fight, if fought the right way, can turn into something bigger than anyone ever imagined. They lied to evict me, but the truth stayed. And so did I.